Command line arguments. This is something that won't take too long, actually. Kind of surprised it was actually slotted for either 1/3 of the week last week or half, I think. Command line arguments you've seen in some form already, but to step back, command line arguments are about getting input from the user. What you've seen in terms of programming is getting input from the user, text-based input, the input function. This is interactive, so you get the input as the program runs. Command line arguments, the difference right here. So this is just to stress as people miss these things. Oh, where's the annotation? There it is. So this is as the program runs. This part, the key part, is before. And another part with the command line arguments is you get all the inputs at once, which, in my opinion, it has some strengths, command line arguments. I'll try and do my best to show you when you can use it. But at the same time, it has its weakness in some cases. If you're getting all the inputs for your program at once and you're typing them in, if you're just typing them in as you run the program, if you make one typographical mistake in one of those command line arguments, you don't have the ability to recover. You have to restart the program, type in all those inputs at once. But there is certain circumstances where typing all these in all at once can be an advantage. I'll just mention that one quickly, but at least mention it, because the quick mention of it isn't really mandatory for class. There's some additional things that I talk about that go beyond the class to help you see, well, why are we learning this, aside from, okay, you might need to use it in your assignment or know it on the exam. So it means with the command line arguments, as you run your program, however you run it, you give it the inputs all at once. Now you can get additional inputs here potentially, but then it kind of negates command line arguments. This is kind of an either or usually. An example of command line arguments, you've seen it. Now that detail I mentioned is right here. The command line arguments with various Unix commands. Now you might have seen different ones. These are command line arguments. So you can see from this context, as I'm running the LS program, these are actually inputs into the program, the first input, second input. And it determines which command you're running versus the inputs with a space. And the common convention of Unix is there's a dash before each command line arguments. Hopefully that looks familiar. Any questions about the basics of the command line arguments at this point before I get into more details? Okay, fairly straightforward at this point. The basics aren't overly complicated. So in case you didn't learn this particular command line argument, the review of the LS, it shows the listing of the current working directory. So I'm over here looking at somewhere in Unix over here, and we've got my other course that I'm currently teaching, 409, and we see directories and we see various files. Fine, that's LS running that program, Unix program. If we type the ls minus L, in case you weren't taught this in tutorial, the minus L is for long form, where we get additional information. Oh, I'd say almost certainly you should be taught this. I'm not dead certain. I say almost certainly because I don't determine tutorial materials. Long form shows additional information such as the permissions for the directory or the file, the owner of it, the group associated with it, the file size, the time date, the date, I should say, not the time here, the year, and then name of the file. So we have additional details. And there's various other ones that you can see, other arguments you can pass to LS as well too. And this isn't restricted to just Unix. You can actually see these in your Mac, I believe. From memory, the program to run something like this is terminal. And that gives you an interface somewhat like this. And I say Unix/Linux because these are core commands. So whether you're using Unix or Linux in the lab or Linux and Mac OS or some variant of this, these core commands still exist. There are major differences between Unix and Linux, but at this level, you won't notice a difference. So if you want to practice this without, for instance, going into lab, here's how you can do so. Now at the Windows CMD, you also have the command line interface. So you can start it up and start, and then CMD command prompt, they call it. I have one started here. So let me, here's a command to clear your window. CLS, it's to clear at Linux. Now, they don't have an LS here. That's a Unix/Linux command, include this. Whoops. Let's mix these two up. But the dir, aforementioned here, we can see this. Now, if I type dir, and it's a big directory, or if my window's small, see there's some of them that we miss. We have to do a lot of scrolling to be able to see the details. So what we can do is we can apply as input, this over here, it says dir command. As we're writing it, this is a command line argument. Example here. This command line argument is right there. But we don't have that convention of the dash command line argument. The Windows convention is that /. Now, get rid of that. Get off annotate mode. Now this command line argument, this basically tells us what command line arguments are available to dir here. And it displays the commands by default, the arguments, one screen at a time. To press any key, continue. So that's equivalent of what I've shown you in Python. You have the input function. It's waiting for me to type in user input and end the user input with an enter. And P is the one that I have shown in the screenshot here, where if we've got a long screen, or if our window is very small, whoops, /P, we get that it shows the screen full of time. Press any key to continue. Although it's more sophisticated, the input, where it's able to determine the end of input by pressing a key, not just enter. Otherwise, things can scroll past the screen. So there's an example of command line arguments you can try out. And there's the /P as one argument. And I've shown if you actually want to learn about the command, if you want to have more information about command line arguments, particular one in Windows, preface it with the /? That shows you information. So the standard, they call it, these are manual pages for command. They have the command and then the explanation. Although it's kind of a techie explanation. It's not meant for someone who's, say, a non-computer user. But then a command line argument is no longer meant for non-computer users. I say no longer. Historically, a little bit of computer history here, this was the standard interface for computers many decades ago. And that's all you had. It wasn't a window that you open up, but when you stop your computer, you would get a command line. You'd have no graphical interface. So it wasn't a window, but this was your only interaction. In Unix, if you want to learn more about the command line arguments, or how to use a command, it's MAN for the manual pages. So if you want to learn information about LS, for instance, you can at the command prompt in the lab or remotely log in, MAN LS, and it gives you an explanation. And these are the manual pages. On the other hand, if you're unfamiliar with the format of the manual pages, there's man, which is the manual pages on the manual pages. And as I mentioned, in Windows, if you want to learn more about a particular command, it's the command and then /? Different conventions, but same idea. Now, this is as you run your program. It used to be, in the past, I would actually have people run programs until, say, about 2 years ago, this way at the command line. In this case, it's easier to see command line arguments, but running your program is actually trickier because you have to know paths and other things. Python here, or dir, is a program that's built into Windows, and from any directory, it'll work. Python, on the other hand, is installed in a specific location. It's not installed in this work directory. So what you'd have to do is do some things and configure it so that your computer knows how to find where the Python install is. And then you type in, say, the name of the file that contains the Python program. And you could, as you run this, type in command line arguments. That'd be the first one. And it doesn't have to be first. I'm just helping you see that that's the first. That's the second argument. So what these ones are, is it's a little bit easier to see in the old school way, which you can still run. These are command line arguments here as you run Python. And you can do the equivalent of this with when you run a Java program as well too. Although I don't know if we'll get into command line argumenting semester. Depends what Jonathan Hudson, coordinator, has in mind. It's a little bit more implicit. How do you actually tell what when you're running a program, how do you provide these command line arguments if you're using a graphical environment? Well, I included 2 different development environments. For sure, I included PyCharm. It took me a little bit to do it. I don't use command line arguments much, but I also see the value of it under certain circumstances. With IDLE, and I've been showing this one, I've actually accidentally invoked that option. Normally it's run and then run that module. And then it runs a program. Sometimes I've accidentally misclicked and it's run customized. And here we can give our inputs. So if we wanted to give it inputs, now this program is actually one of my object-oriented examples in the next section, so it's not going to do anything with them. Now we don't have to have a dash or a /. The inputs, we type in the first input, second input, and a space between 2. That's how we enter command line arguments. And it still has the same output because this program isn't trying to access command line arguments. You have to specifically access them. So here's how we can pass to our program command line arguments. As you run the program, you provide these inputs. And it shows here the name of the program that we're going to run. That's actually the first command line argument. It's stored in your unit, in your Python program, basically, in a list form, and that's list index 0, and that's 1 and 2. That's your first one, that's your second one, but that's index 1, that's index 2 as we see. To access your command line argument of PyCharm, here's how you can access it through the menu options. It pulls up a pop-up. So the previous program, it's number 1 simple command line arguments. I have 2 programs for this. One is, as the name implies, a simple one. One's a little bit more sophisticated, but it's command line arguments, not hard. So that's the name 1 simple command line arguments, and the rest of it here. And then down here in this input field, as we see here, we can specify command line arguments. And if I recall what the PyCharms mean, since before reading, but I actually haven't done this. I had to figure out how to do this. It should, every time we run that program, if I recall, have these same command line arguments until you change it here. Whereas with IDLE, this one I know, it's as you run it. So you can change it each time you run it. Oh, someone's waiting in the waiting room here. So I'll show, and so IDLE I find fairly straightforward. This one I had to actually really dig for a bit. It's not just that I use this one more, I found it more straightforward, but here's an additional resource if you want to see step by step. So the first program over here, I'll open and run it, simple command line arguments. If I run it without any command line argument, whoops, let me just run it as per usual, the run modular, hit the F5 here. All it does is it indicates the name of that file that contains the Python program, which is this. So it grabbed not the first command line argument. The first command line argument is what comes after this. If I run it now here, customized, and I don't type anything, it's still just going to tell me the name of that file that contains this program. That's this. On the other hand, if I run this, now whatever I typed in, it's just not going back. And I can do more than this. We can type in whatever we have as we would get through the input function. We can also get the command line argument here. If I type in more inputs, now this program is very simple. That's why it's called simple command line argument. Whoop, help if I equals this ran the one where I can type in command line arguments first, second, and each command line argument is separated with a space, so we know where one begins and ends. So you can imagine if this was, say, a string, how we could figure out each one. We look for that space character, or we could use things like slicing, for instance, slice according to space character. But it only grabs the first command line argument with the simple program. How does it do it? So sys is a library that's built in. So with this program here, it's a part of Python, but I had to import it because it's not that core part that you get automatically like with the print and with the input. Once we've imported that name, SYS, the command line arguments in Python in a list. And list index 0 is the name of. So you can actually tell what it's by my output statements, what it's grabbing. It's grabbing a name of the file that contains the program that we're running, which will be this. We run it again to make some sense here. So it's one simple command line and so on. We can give no command line arguments. So this here, sys.argv, this is a 1D list, index 0, is the name of this one here. And if I added, what the heck is it? If I imported SYS into any of my other programs, and I had this passed to print, then I would get alternate names of the file. I suppose I can add that in the other one, but I'll make sure I don't. I save it as a temporary. This is one from the next section. Paste this over here. And I don't want the rest of the program running, at least not yet here. So I'll pause the program. And even if I pass it no command line arguments, the command line arguments are what follows the name of the file containing the program. That first list element is going to be the name of that file. And there it is. And it includes actually the path here. Oh, I didn't actually. Now it didn't display anything when I typed in first, because this is my other program that I just added the ability to get the name of the file. I have a command line argument, but I didn't do anything with it. That's going to be the additional list elements. But in this program, see, I'm not accessing argv index 1. Let's go back to that. Now what this is doing is, this is some error prevention. It's checking to see the length of that list, as you see, calling a length function. So if it's greater than 1, right now it's 1 because we have something at index 0, and it will always have something at index 0 because in order to run this, we need a Python program. But we want to see if person's typed in command line arguments, anything after it, so it's going to be 2 or greater. If it's 2 or greater, we only grab the first. This is hard-coded, so we only grab the first command line argument, index 1. Now I could display argv2 potentially, but if I only gave one input, it's going to crash. This is how we grab the elements. See, if we change this to 0, the output message, the output here is going to be wonky because it's not going to display my first command line argument. But it just displays the name of the file twice as well as the path. If I change it to argv1, now it should display the first command line argument first. There you go. So that's the basics of getting it. The one that's a little more sophisticated, how to access them all. So we get the link of it. So this is dynamic. It's not hard-coded to just assuming one or more. If the case is the person doesn't type anything, that's just the name of the file, no inputs. The name of the file and the path isn't counted as command line argument. Just typing ls is in the command line argument. That's running command. And now we're going to step through potentially if it's not 1, and we're going to count through. Number of arguments. Suppose that the person typed in 1 command line argument. Then this is going to be 2. It's going to be 2 because index 0, recall, is the file name. Index 1 is the first argument. So there's going to be 2 elements in the list. It's not going to be 1 here where they typed in no inputs. So in this case, I starts at 1 because we want to step through index 1, the first argument, and it's going to print the first argument with a preference to indicate this first argument. Then I steps to 2. Well, 2 is not less than 2, which is fine because we don't want to access a non-existent index 2. So this is going to run number of times it runs. Equals the number of command line arguments. We're going to see this print with input number and then I determined by number of command line arguments. Show this. If I run it with no command line arguments, then the number of arguments is going to be 1, just the name of this file. No inputs. The name of the file is not counted as a command line argument. It's not an input. If I run it here customized and I provide no inputs, same thing. Run it here. The first command line argument is 1. Run it again. That 1 still should be there. Now I'm typing it so you can see which is which, but there's nothing to force me to say the second command line argument is be second. I can type in something else. Now I have 3 command line arguments. That loop's going to run 3 times. Oh, looks like I got a little bit of a logic error here. Should be I instead of 1. Typographical mistake here. Because it was still just displaying the first one. It should go through the I values. There you go. You have to catch that one. Copy paste error. I just grabbed it from the previous example, but I didn't change that. I didn't change that from hard-coded 1 to I. So that's a requirement in terms of what you need to know for the course for now. Command line arguments, what they are, they're inputs into the program that you run all at once. And you run it as you run the program. After you run the program, you can still give it inputs of input, but they're not command line arguments, they're regular inputs. Now, with something like this, okay, it doesn't necessarily look so bad on a typo. If I run it the old school approach, where I'm doing this, the disadvantage I dislike about command line arguments, why I tend not to use it, especially if the tasks I do, is if I have one typo, and it doesn't, again, have to be just text, it can be a number here. It can be Booleans and so on. If I make one typo, I can't have a loop to recover because there's no loops running. Right now, I'm just at the command line. I'm not running a Python program. So if you're typing it in all at once and you have a lot of inputs, then that's a disadvantage of command line arguments. Now you might ask yourself, well, why use command line arguments? Well, command line arguments are frequently used by people like system administrators, people who maintain the system, say in the computer labs. They have multiple computers to run. What you can do is command line arguments are useful. Why bother with them? There is a case where they can be used. They are quite useful. I'll answer that. Well, I see Evan's question. So I haven't got to this yet, but I'll answer your question. What's your question, Evan?
Just a quick question. Does the run as administrator count as a command line argument in Windows?
Does the what the administrator account, you mean?
No, like the when you click on a file, like right click on a file and say run as administrator, does that count as a command line argument?
Well, oh, the run it? No. The run as administrator is just permissions to run it, because an administrator has more permissions than a regular user. And that applies both in Windows and that applies in Unix. You see, an administrator in Unix has the ability to do things like if you have your account and it's closed off and it should be closed off to other people, an administrator, if they had to, they can actually go into your account in various ways. They have greater permissions. That's not necessarily a command line argument. See, the run as administrator, I'm right-clicking. This is not a command line argument. I'm doing it graphically. And in terms of Windows, it's very similar. With multiple accounts, I have my account right now. It's the work account. I have this for various reasons. One is I have a few accounts. And then I have my main account, my personal account. You can have an administrator account that has more permissions for various reasons. Say if we have multiple users, I don't want one user being able to access another user's files. But an administrator would need potentially to access people's files for various reasons. Say if the guy's locked out. The administrator account is level of access. What I can do with an administrator, what a user can't do, is I can create new user accounts. I can change one of these accounts over here, my work account's not showing, because I'm already logged in as this, to change the access level from a regular user to administrator. So the run as is basically just permission levels, but that permission level can either be done graphically or it can be done at a command line. That's what the difference is. And why you might want to have this in Windows, besides even if you don't have multiple users, is in terms of security. If I'm a regular user, you have limited security in terms of installing programs, which is a good thing, because if I click on a virus, then I'm less likely to do damage with it. So if I'm running as a regular administrator, then there's a greater chance I could have something malicious installed. That's one reason why they have the two separate things. Okay. But that's independent of command line arguments, because as an administrator, I can run things graphically or I can run things at a command line argument. That's where I said it's a little bit hazy seeing what a command line argument is, because traditionally, this is how you ran your programs, the command line. It's easy to see what a command line argument is, where now it's kind of munged up with a graphical running of the program. An administrator is basically someone who runs a computer, but usually a computer system, multiple computers, has to maintain them. Do things like run backups when things go wrong, fix things, to install programs, but not just on one computer, but multiple computers. So an example of why bother command line arguments is what we can do is the inputs and the contents of that, you can save in a text file, and context of the text file is input into a program. So you type it in once, all the inputs, and then you can indicate when you run that program that you get the inputs not from me typing it, but from a file. Example, now you have to be careful with the file format with most of the Unix programs. So this one, there's one that I'll work with. I haven't done this much because my job is an system administrator. You can try this in the computer lab, or if you're logged in remotely. Cat is catalog. It shows the contents of the whole file. So you could say cat, and if you have a long assignment, a3.py, it'll show it on the screen, and it doesn't pause it per page. Now, what we can do is this one will work. That's what there's that looks like a less than. That's actually, what the hell is it called? Redirection. So rather than getting input from the keyboard, it's redirecting or getting input from a file. So if I already have something called my file, txt, rather than typing the file name, it'll show the contents of it. Now, this one isn't overly useful, but if you can get redirection working, and you have something like ls minus a minus l and a whole bunch of other things, you type in the file once. If there's a typo, then you fix it in editor. That way, when you type in all these commands in the editor, you don't have to worry so much about typos. It's an advantage with command line arguments, where rather than me typing all this, what I could do, you have to get, I believe it's the file format that it's very picky about, because if you type it in regular text file, it's not going to work. Suppose it's called commands for ls. It'll get all the commands that I have in here, and it becomes input to the ls command. But I believe it's format, because if you just type it in regular for text file, it's not going to work. I didn't take the time to do this because it's not mandatory for the course. But what I want to do is just show you, well, why would one bother command line arguments? It'll automate tasks. Because as system administrator, you want to make shortcuts, make things easier. So if you have a lot of arguments to type again and again for every user, what I could do is type this in once and then automate it by having it, rather than me typing in all those commands at once, type it once in a file and then just put the file name using redirection. Redirection allows the output of something to become the input of something else. For instance, you can do this in the lab or potentially at home and then run your Python programs this way. You're saying at the command line, run the Python translator, and the input becomes your program. Fine. You can use redirection the other way. This is redirecting input into your program. This is redirecting all the output. If my program is not interactive, I don't have any inputs in my inputs where I'm prompting for user input, then all the outputs my print don't appear on screen and they appear on a file. That way I can analyze my output at my leisure. So here's an example of input. And just to show the advantage of command line arguments, type it once in a file, and then you run this one short command once. Or better yet, we can at Unix, if we had to do this for every user, we could use a loop essentially, and then loop it for every user. And that loop runs once for every user. Or we can do other things, redirection like this. Now this part here goes beyond the scope of what you need to know for a course, but I wanted to include this just to show you, I'm trying to give you a balanced view. I don't use command line arguments myself, but I can see the value of it. So I'm just using this part to give you some inkling of why one would bother, aside from it's in the course. That's why I take more time than the other instructors. And since I showed redirecting of input in the program, that's less than the redirecting of output. So rather than having it appear on the screen, rather than input, rather than keyboard input, you get file input. Rather than having screen output, you get the output redirected towards a file. These are some of those little geek things that people like in Unix that can make life easier in certain cases. I'll go through quickly because you know what a command line argument is. You have seen code in 231 with Python. Now what you're just going to learn is how to do it in Java, which isn't hard. Very quick review, command line arguments, run the program ls. You can just type ls, it has default listing of directory. -a and l, these are inputs to ls as you run ls. So this is command line arguments as you run the program, or before you run the program, so it hasn't been running. Now, this is different from getting input while the program runs. An example in Java is basically using the scanner class. This and this has their place. How to get it in? Syntax. I've already given you a hint. When you run your program, as you've been shown, it runs the main method. This essentially stores, when you call a method, you can pass inputs. The inputs are passed in the form of command line arguments. Now I should be able to read the syntax. This is an array of strings. The name of the array is args, argument string. The first command line argument. So when you type this in, Java, that's not command line argument. That's the name of the file. Java class, not command line argument. After the program name comes the command line arguments. First argument, second argument here. And this first argument now becomes args0. The second one is args1. Oops, look, I changed this one. Did I? Command line argument. Oh, if I type in no command line argument, because this is an array, it has a length attribute. If I type in nothing, if I just type in simple commands, then args length is 0. Because all I typed in was this and this, there's no index 0. Consequently, and let alone 1 or 2, the length of it is 0. Looks like I screwed up. I was fiddling with this a few times. So I only typed in one command line argument. So it shouldn't be length of 2, but length of 1 in this case. And you can print this out. So in an example, you actually have args.length. And you can display the length and display the attributes. Args0 in this case is the bool. It's immediately what follows the name of the program. Simple command line arguments. So in this case, I do a little bit of I'm a little bit smarter than the previous one. So, here it is. Oh, wait, I don't have it here. Simple. Nice. Part. So now I'm typing in no command line arguments. Nothing follows the name of the program. Simple command line arguments. So my program is able to detect there's no command line arguments. I'll try and grab args0 because otherwise it's going to grab non-existent element and crash. I check it right here, the length. I can pass it to print, for instance, or println. I'm just querying. It's not, if it's greater than 0, then I retrieve the args0. If it's not, then I have that message. On the other hand, if I run this program, first command line argument, what's that? I can type in multiple ones, but this is a simple one. We only get the first one. I could get the other ones at args1 and 2, but I should actually check to see, do I have what the length is before I start grabbing elements like I did here. I have at least one element, so I grab the first element. Now, how to configure this in IntelliJ. IntelliJ, it's going to take a moment to load, so I'll move on to here while we're waiting for it to load. Iterative command line arguments. So this is how we can actually, well, this is awfully slow, get all the command line arguments with a loop. We've seen this with arrays. This is just the command line argument array. We put it in size, we start at index 0. If size is 0, we never execute the loop. In this case, we enter it with, was it foo bar and third is the arguments. So the length is 3, it's going to execute 3 times. Size is 3, and we start at 0. We retrieve argument at index I starts at 0, index 0, and we get the foo. To show this running, oops, where's the command line? Oh, now I got IntelliJ, but I want to get the command line first just to show iterative one. And now get to IntelliJ here. Didn't want to waste time waiting for no command line arguments. That loop never executed, no output. We run it again. One command, oops, dang, zoom toolbar's in the way. Not there when I need it, it's in the way when I do need it. Don't need it. Our guess one. If we have multiple ones, number of times it executes is equal to number of command line arguments. Back to the IntelliJ here. So I'm going to quickly show you how to do the configuration. The screenshot show you, but I'll quickly show you this. If you want to configure, oh, I got something else, command line. Oh, I got something else here. I was trying to get command line arguments. To configure it, we can set on the class here, the one we want to configure. It's under menu, run, run, edit configurations. Edit configurations, we need to add a new one. I think it was application. Yeah, application. No, it wasn't application. Which one was it? Oh, here it is. It was application. And we have program arguments. So we can type in the first one, second one, and whatever. So that way it's kind of similar to PyCharm or IDLE that I showed. The one thing is, it always defaults to some class. It happens to be main here, so it wasn't a good example. But it'll default to main. What you're going to have to do, I only have one open, so it won't let me select any other. I only have one in the project. But make sure it actually selects the class that you're looking to. Does this one take command line? So this one takes 2. This actually works. Sometimes it gives me. Is it saying the configuration, change configuration? It's good. Probably gonna give me some IntelliJ. Have to start this from scratch likely because it's giving me one of those screw IntelliJ issues. And it's still running. Okay, let's go back here and not waste some time. Yeah, see it's class and num. Yeah, it's an IntelliJ issue. But I was able to make that screen grab because it did work. It might be quicker sometimes if IntelliJ is finicky just to re-import the whole project and start again. But to show you how to do this, no configurations, add new configuration. We need to change this and we need to change this. You have to include the new class name. By default, it has main. Drawbacks, command line arguments. Okay, a few minutes here. They require all the inputs at once. That's the drawback. So it's not fully interactive. If it starts asking based on the earlier ones, it asks for later ones. We can't do that if it reacts. And it also doesn't give information about the inputs, such as a format. So with the fully interactive one, I'll have time to go through this. This is not command line arguments. I'm going to contrast command line. We're asking for name and age. Name has a character limit of 80. So we actually say max limit, it tells us max 80. Command line arguments can't do this. If it's greater than, then we get an error message, exceeds. Command line arguments can do this afterwards, but doesn't provide us the clues. Furthermore, what we could do is repeatedly loop if it's less than 80. I didn't add that, but you should be able to figure out how to do this. And it does something similar of age. It tells us the maximum age is 0 to 118. And it tells me this, 0 to 118, because I have this in the prompt. And we could have a loop here rather than a branch that allows us to recover. Command line arguments don't let us do this. See, if I have this command line one, IntelliJ. What typically they do is if you don't enter it in the right format, it tells you the usage format. Why didn't you tell me this before? That's an annoying thing. If but you can't with a command line type program because, shoot, now the zoom window's in the way here. There we go. Because we can't get right here, we don't have the ability to give clues as to what the input is. That's where the README comes in again. You should indicate how to use your program, the format here. Another part of the command line arguments that that's an issue is if we have many inputs, that's a lot to type in. The more we type in as we run it, we have 100 inputs, the more likely you screw it up. And what we can't do with command line arguments is if, say, it asks for country and then branching based on country, only if it's Canada do we ask, say, for province and other things in Canadian city. We can't do that with command line arguments because it can't. The idea is you get it all at once. It kind of negates the value of asking again as the program's running. So it has drawbacks. Command line arguments very quickly are used like with operating systems commands, dir, ls. So they have their place, but they're not the end all and be all. So that's the end of this.